Riesending Cave Rescue. On June 7, 2014, an experienced team of cave explorers entered the Riesending Cave, located deep in the Bavarian Alps near the town of Ramsau, Germany. Equipped with hundreds of pounds of gear, they descended into one of the deepest and most complex cave systems in Europe, stretching over 22 kilometers and plunging more than 1,200 meters underground. The team's goal was to reach unexplored sections of the cave, pushing deeper than anyone had gone before. Among them was Johann Westhauser, a veteran scientist and one of the original explorers who helped discover the cave back in 1996. The first stages of the descent went smoothly. They reached the first and second base camps exhausted but determined. Deeper into the cave, the team faced tougher conditions. After nearly 10 hours underground, the team reached a straight passage riddled with loose rocks. Every move had to be deliberate, every foothold tested. As they made their way through, Johann took the lead, cautiously advancing across the unstable ground. Then, disaster struck. Without warning, a rockfall erupted from above. A large boulder crashed down, striking Johann in the head. His helmet shattered. He fell instantly unconscious, crumpling onto the cold stone floor. The others froze, horrified. In shock, the team had to act. One member stayed with Johann, while another made the grueling journey back to the surface to get help. It took 10 hours just to reach the entrance. He called for help. Mountain rescue teams mobilized immediately. Over the next hours, more than 700 rescuers from Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, and Croatia descended on the site. Specialized teams entered the cave in shifts, establishing a communication system that allowed text messages to pass through the solid rock. Supplies were carefully ferried down through narrow shafts. Then came logistics. The rescue path was over 1,000 meters straight down, a vertical mile. The team had to reinforce sections with new bolts, install rope lines, create footholds, and constantly clear falling debris. But they didn't just plan to reach Johann, they had to get him out, and he couldn't walk. First, 2 cave doctors reached him. Crawling through the darkness for over 12 hours, they finally arrived at his location. He was alive, but concussed, with a fractured cheekbone and possible brain trauma. They stabilized him, gave him fluids, painkillers, and wrapped him tightly to preserve his body heat. Then came the stretcher, a specially designed, shock-absorbing litter made for tight vertical spaces. Rescuers took turns carrying him through each chamber, using ropes, pulleys, and their own bodies to lower or lift him up walls and shafts. After 11 days underground, on June 19, 2014, Johann was finally brought to the surface at 11:44 a.m. He was immediately airlifted to a hospital in Bavaria, where he spent weeks recovering. The rescue cost nearly $1 million, but against impossible odds, Johann survived. Boy Scout Cave Rescue. On December 27, 2003, a group of 8 boys set out for a day trip to the Withlacoochee State Forest, accompanied by 2 counselors. The plan was to fish, but the chilly spring weather shifted their focus to exploring Peace Cave, a cave known for its tight crawlways and sharp twists, though it wasn't considered dangerous. The group arrived at the cave's entrance. It was familiar to them. Most of the cave was easy to navigate, about 50 feet long, with ceilings high enough for a 6-foot person to stand. The counselors, older and larger, couldn't fit through the cave's narrow sections, so they stayed outside, letting the boys explore on their own. Javerick Henderson, 16, and Michael Sharrow, 15, led the others deeper into the cave. Curious and bold, they veered off the main tunnel into a narrow side passage, a section known as the Hairpin Curve, a brutally narrow twist that forced even the smallest explorers to wriggle through like snakes. The passage was tight, barely wide enough to crawl through. Michael squeezed in first with Henderson behind, but midway through, as Henderson twisted his body to make the turn, he got stuck. Stone against ribs and arms trapped. He couldn't move forward, and he couldn't move back. He was wedged. Michael tried to turn back, but the passage left little room to move. He wedged himself in, trying to help Henderson, but the jagged walls scraped against their skin. An hour passed. Michael, exhausted and cold, collapsed. He lay motionless in the tunnel. Henderson, still stuck, now had to deal with the growing horror of watching his friend go still. The air felt thinner. He cried for help over and over. The other boys, still in the wider section behind them, terrified, ran back to the entrance for help and told the counselors what had happened. The counselors, realizing the boys were missing, called for help immediately. Within minutes, rescuers raced to the scene. With full equipment and experience, they went in fast. When rescuers reached the Hairpin Curve, the scene was grim. Henderson was conscious, but barely, shaking, slipping in and out of focus, still hopelessly stuck. But Michael was unresponsive. They worked fast, carefully widening the passage with chisels, one echoing strike at a time. The sound bounced through the cave, sharp and urgent. After an hour of delicate work, they pulled Henderson free. Alive but weak, wrapped in blankets, he was carried out through the winding tunnels and rushed to medical care. Then came Michael, still unconscious, his pulse weak. It took 2 more hours to free him, inch by inch. He was carried out and rushed to paramedics waiting outside. Against all odds, both survived. Tham Luang Rescue. On June 23, 2018, 12 boys from the Wild Boar soccer team and their coach set out for a quick adventure in Tham Luang Cave, nestled in the lush, rugged hills of northern Thailand. Aged 11 to 16, and Ake, their 25-year-old assistant coach, led them after soccer practice. They carried only flashlights, some water, and snacks. No rain gear, and no plan for trouble. The cave was familiar, a sign warned of flash floods, but the monsoon wasn't due for weeks. Ake figured they'd be in and out in an hour. The boys ditched their bikes and bags at the entrance, stepping into the cool, dark chambers. T, Ake's 16-year-old assistant, led the way until they hit a T-junction. He froze. He'd forgotten the route. Meanwhile, monsoon rain came early, sudden and violent. Water poured into the limestone cave system, flooding chambers and cutting off exits. Within hours, the boys were trapped deep inside, over 2 miles from the entrance. Darkness closed around them. They were lost. Water roared in. A flash flood, sudden and merciless. Outside, a park worker spotted their bikes and cleats. Alarmed, he called in army rangers. Parents gathered, shouting into the void. Rescue teams were summoned immediately, but the cave fought them at every turn. Flooded tunnels blocked access, zero visibility underwater. The rescuers couldn't even get a few hundred meters inside. Days passed. International help arrived. Elite cave divers from the UK, Australia, men like Rick Stanton and John Valanthan, they traveled thousands of miles to reach the scene, carrying their custom gear and decades of experience. The plan was grimly simple. Find them first, then figure out how to get them out. On July 2nd, after 9 days trapped in darkness, 2 British divers finally located the boys. They found them perched on a rocky ledge above the floodwaters, miraculously alive, weak but breathing. The boys huddled together for warmth. Finding them was one thing, getting them out would be another. The rescue teams faced an impossible task. The boys couldn't dive. Most of them didn't even know how to swim. The flooded tunnels were over a mile long with tight choke points, jagged rocks, and strong currents. Even experienced divers could barely make it through without panic setting in. One Thai Navy SEAL, Saman Gunan, died while placing air tanks along the route, running out of oxygen himself. The rescue leaders devised a desperate plan. Each boy would be sedated with ketamine to keep them unconscious during the dive. One diver would guide each boy through the tunnels, tethered together by rope and oxygen lines. It was dangerous beyond belief. If a boy's mask slipped, if he woke up and panicked, he could drown instantly. But there was no other way. On July 8th, the mission began. Divers entered the cave at dawn. Slowly, carefully, they transported the first group through submerged chambers, squeezing them through narrow gaps barely wider than a person's body. It took hours to move just a few hundred meters. When the first 4 boys emerged alive, the crowd outside erupted in cheers. Hope returned, but they were only halfway there. Over the next 2 days, the operation continued. More boys brought out, one by one. On July 10th, the last 4 boys and their coach were finally pulled from the cave. The rescuers emerged exhausted, battered, some barely able to stand, but alive. Against impossible odds, all 13 survived. Black Cave Tragedy. In April 1995, Thomas Edward Benning decided to explore Black Cave in Arizona. He'd been there before and knew the terrain well. Confident and experienced, he entered alone, carrying nothing but an electric miner's lamp. No helmet, no backup gear, no shirt. The entrance was familiar and Thomas moved through the early passages with ease. But deep inside, something new caught his eye. A narrow side tunnel he had never noticed before. Curiosity got the better of him. He veered off the main route and entered the passage. He kept walking, crawling, twisting through the tight rock. But after some time, he realized he was lost. He turned back, but every direction looked the same. After an hour, he still couldn't find the main path. Then the worst happened. His lamp began to flicker. A few minutes later, it went out entirely, leaving him in complete darkness. With no flashlight, no sense of direction, and no help, Thomas was alone, miles underground. He reached for the only other light source he had, a small box of matches. He lit one. It cast a weak, flickering glow across the rock walls. He kept moving, match after match, but they burned out fast. Soon, he had nothing left. To avoid going in circles, he began leaving behind small personal items to mark his path. Hungry, thirsty, exhausted, he stumbled through the darkness until he came upon a fissure in the rock, a narrow vertical crack about 4 feet deep. It could be a way out, maybe even a connection to a bigger passage. With no other choice, he lowered himself in feet first. Then he stopped. His hips dropped below the narrowest point and he was stuck, completely wedged in. He couldn't go down. He couldn't pull himself up. He tried everything. Nothing worked. Trapped in silence, alone. Back home, his wife noticed he hadn't returned. Worried, she called the police. The search began, but Thomas hadn't told anyone where he was going. Authorities scoured multiple caves. Days passed. Finally, they found his car parked near Black Cave. Rescuers went in and searched the mapped areas. They found his glasses, his shirt, but they missed the hidden passage, the one he had followed. Incredibly, Thomas was still alive, but time was running out. His condition was deteriorating. Rescue teams eventually called off the search. He was officially declared missing. His wife refused to give up. She posted flyers, spoke to the media, but she wouldn't get answers for a long time. It wasn't until December 1996, over a year and a half later, while 3 cave explorers searching Black Cave found a narrow passage in unmapped section. Inside, they found Thomas's body. He had never made it out, and there, in the dark, trapped between the rock walls. Mossdale Cavern Incident. It was June 24, 1967, when 10 young cave explorers set out to explore Mossdale Cavern in North Yorkshire, England. Their goal? To push deeper into the uncharted parts of the cave and complete a map out some deeper passages. Among them were 2 experienced leaders who had explored Mossdale before. Their confidence inspired the others, even though the cave was notorious for its tight spaces, with very few areas where a person could fully stand. Just hours into the expedition, 4 members had already seen enough. They made the decision to turn back and return to the surface. When they emerged, they noticed the skies had turned dark with rain. The storm was building, but at the time, it didn't seem urgent. Back underground, the remaining 6 explorers were crawling through one of the tightest and most dangerous parts of the system, a section known as the Far Marathon. It was barely 18 inches by 12 inches. As they worked, rain began to fall. At first, it seemed like nothing serious, but on the surface, things quickly turned dangerous. Water levels inside the cave started rising fast. Realizing the danger, the group inside decided to head back, but they were still 3 hours from the entrance. By the time the surface team realized what was happening, it was too late. A lake had formed around the entrance, sealing the explorers inside, and they just ran to get help. The 6 trapped explorers had no idea how much water was about to rush in. They frantically searched for higher ground, but the cave was merciless. The water kept rising, pressing against their faces. Rescuers and hundreds of volunteers worked tirelessly, pumping water out and oxygen in, hoping they had found a safe chamber. But in the end, every single one of them drowned. Sterkfontain Cave. It was September 29, 1984, when 3 cave explorers were exploring unmapped sections of the Sterkfontain Cave in South Africa. Leading the group was Nuno Gomes. Alongside him were his friends Peter and Malcolm. They wanted to lay a guideline all the way to the farthest point of the wet cave area, a chamber known as Milner Hall. The plan was simple. Nuno would dive in, lay the line, and Peter and Malcolm would assist from outside the water. Nuno plunged into the water and successfully laid a 396-foot guideline from the entrance to the Milner Hall. With the job done, the trio decided to go back in, this time together, and follow the line to the end. Once they reached the air pocket at the back of the cave, they were satisfied that they had successfully mapped this cave section. But as they turned around and started swimming out, something went wrong. Nuno felt Malcolm tapping him underwater. Peter was no longer behind them. They turned around and found that Peter had wandered into a side tunnel. Nuno tapped him, signaling for him to return to the main line and head back. But just minutes later, he disappeared again. This time, Nuno and Malcolm assumed Peter had taken a different route out, avoiding the tight squeeze they had used, so they didn't go back to look for him. But when they surfaced, Peter wasn't there. Nuno and Malcolm quickly re-entered the cave, searching the tunnels, but Peter wasn't there. And the water was now filled with silt. Visibility had dropped to 0. After 4 hours of searching and with their tanks nearly empty, they had no choice but to return to the surface and call for help. And police divers arrived later that evening. The silt was so stirred up that visibility was heavily impaired. The police called off the search for the night, convinced they would now be searching for a body rather than a survivor. But Peter wasn't dead. Somewhere in the dark, in a side tunnel off the main path, Peter had gotten lost. He eventually found a small air pocket chamber and decided to wait for rescuers. He tried everything, flashing his light into the water, banging his tank against the rock, but no one came. That first night, he slept in complete darkness, unaware that the police had sealed off the cave. No one else was allowed in. And because the water remained cloudy for days, the police delayed the search, convinced no one could survive that long underground. On October 6th, 7 days after Peter's disappearance, they returned, but still, no sign of Peter. Meanwhile, Peter was still alive. He had now spent 14 days in total darkness, without food, starving, and exhausted. At one point, he decided to try escaping on his own. He followed a tunnel for 120 feet, hoping it led to safety, but it was a dead end. So, he went back to the small chamber and waited. After 6 weeks, and with no sign of him, the police ended the search altogether. That's when volunteers stepped in, trying to find a connection between the dry and wet parts of the cave. And Nuno Gomes was one of them. And it was Nuno who made the key discovery, a connection to the wet section that no one had noticed before. Inside, they found footprints, Peter's footprints, leading to a small chamber, and just a few feet beyond that, his body. Beside him was a note. It read, "I love you, Cheryl and Ma." The autopsy confirmed it that Peter had died of starvation. He had survived alone, in complete darkness, for 3 weeks. Gollum Cave. On August 18, 2005, 5 friends set out to explore the Gollum Cave, but a cave known as the Cave of Death because of how dangerous it was. They arrived at the entrance around 3 a.m. One of them decided to wait outside, while the other 4 entered. Right from the start, they faced challenges. To even get in, they had to crawl through a pool of water. Inside, the path forked. They went left. That decision led them to another pool of water. It connected to another section of the cave through a narrow underwater tunnel, just 3 to 4 feet wide. You had to fully submerge, swim about 15 feet in total darkness, and trust that you'd find air on the other side. One by one, they slipped into the water and swam through. When they emerged, they found a small chamber with barely 3 feet of airspace above the water, just enough to breathe. But something was wrong. This was what cave explorers call bad air, a toxic mix of low oxygen and high carbon dioxide. It weakens the muscles and makes it nearly impossible to think clearly or hold your breath for long. As they tried to escape, the first person dove into the tunnel, but disoriented, panicking, and running out of breath, he couldn't find the way out. He drowned. Then the next person tried. Same result. One by one, each friend entered the tunnel hoping to escape, only to find the bodies of the others and meet the same tragic fate. Meanwhile, the friend outside grew anxious. No voices, no splashes, just silence. He entered the cave, called their names, but heard nothing. He backed out and called for help. Rescuers soon arrived. They pumped oxygen into the cave, tried to drain water, but it was too late. All 4 had died inside, and Gollum's Cave was sealed with cement, closed off to the public for good. Rink Cave Rescue. On May 25, 2003, Chris Molyneux, a 36-year-old cave explorer, planned a cave trip with his family to Rink Cave in Washington. He had been inside caves before, but this time, he wanted to take his wife and kids with himself. They packed up and drove to the mountains. Chris brought his wife Michelle and their 3 young children. He parked their car about 200 yards from the cave entrance. Soon, they found a dark hole in the ground. Chris looked at it. He wasn't sure if this was the real entrance to Rink Cave. To be safe, he decided to go in alone first. The cave got tighter and darker as he walked in. After about 100 feet, he found a small crawlway. It was only 18 inches high. Chris turned on his headlamp and checked his map. He believed this crawlway would lead to the main chamber of the cave. He got on his hands and knees and crawled through the tight space. On the other side, he stood up and found himself in a bigger tunnel. He started walking, but something felt wrong. He walked for a long time and still didn't find the main chamber. Then, he came across some fallen rocks. These rocks weren't shown on his map. He climbed over them and kept walking. Still, there was no sign of the main part of the cave. So Chris decided to turn back. He walked back the same way he came. Then, he found what looked like the crawlway, but it was blocked with dirt and rocks. He tried going the other way, but after walking a long distance, he found another blocked area, and it looked exactly the same. Chris was confused. There was only supposed to be 1 crawlway, not 2. To test something, he drew a big X in the dirt with his finger. Then he walked the other way and counted his steps. After 400 steps, he saw the same X in the dirt. That's when he realized the cave was a loop. He was walking in circles. There was no way out. Chris started to panic. He had already been underground for over an hour. He tried to stay calm. He tore small pieces of his map and left them at different places to keep track of where he had been. Time passed slowly. After 5 hours of walking in circles, Chris was exhausted. He was thirsty. He couldn't think straight. He sat down and started to cry. He thought about his family. His wife and kids were waiting outside. That gave him the strength to keep going. He stood up and walked back to the blocked entrance again. This time, he stayed close to the wall and looked carefully at every inch. And finally, he saw it. Just 50 feet from the blocked entrance, behind a rock, was a small crawlway. It was the way out. He had passed it many times, but it was hard to see. Chris dropped to the ground and crawled through the opening as fast as he could. A few minutes later, he saw light. He was outside. He had been trapped in the cave for 6 hours. When Chris got out, his family wasn't there. They had left to get help. Later, he found out that Michelle had walked all the way back to the road with the kids and found someone to drive them to a ranger station. She returned with rescuers just as Chris was walking out of the cave. After this, the cave got a new name. It's now called Minotaur Cave because of the strange loop inside. The Megawell Cave incident. On February 11, 1998, 4 friends, James Lewis, Alan England, Darl Moore, and Jerry Olson, went on a caving trip. Jerry had recently found the cave while hiking in the Tennessee woods. The cave entrance was very small, only about 9 inches wide. That's about the size of a dinner plate. The narrow opening led down about 4 feet, then dropped 11 feet, followed by another 10-foot drop. The 4 friends stood at the entrance looking at the tiny, wet opening. It was dark and tight. From the surface, they could see the steep drop into the darkness below. The cave passages twisted and turned like a corkscrew, leaving very little room to move. Because the entrance was so narrow, only one person could go in at a time. The group carefully checked all their gear, especially their ropes. Alan England was the oldest at 63, but he was very fit and also the smallest. He volunteered to go first. The team tied a rope above the cave entrance. This rope would help Alan climb back out later. Alan took a deep breath and began to squeeze into the narrow slot. He had to twist and turn his body to fit. His clothes got wet from the damp cave walls as he pushed through. Once inside, Alan lowered himself down 7 feet with the help of the rope. The space opened up a little, and he could finally stretch his arms and legs. He shined his headlamp down to see the next part. There was another drop of about 10 feet and more twisting passages below. Alan wanted to explore more, but he knew it was too risky to go deeper alone. He decided it was safer to turn back. Climbing up was harder than going down. The rope helped, but when Alan reached the narrow slot again, he got stuck. What was easy to slide down was almost impossible to climb up. He tried to push through, but the slot was tighter than before. His wet clothes stuck to the rock, making it even harder to move. James and Darl saw Alan struggling. They pulled on the rope to help, but the tight space made it worse. Each pull wedged Alan deeper into the rock. Alan was getting tired. His hands shook from the cold and effort. The cave was very cold, and it was winter outside. His wet clothes made him shiver badly. The narrow space made it hard for him to breathe deeply. James and Jerry tried to help by lowering extra clothes and a warm drink. Alan drank the warm liquid, but he was still stuck and freezing cold. After a long time, Alan called out. He said he couldn't keep going and needed help. James and Jerry quickly hiked back to Jerry's house and called the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team. Within 2 hours, the rescue team arrived. Alan had been trapped for nearly 5 hours. He was pale and shaking from the cold. He kept thinking about how easy it was to slide down the slot, but now he couldn't climb back up. The rescuers gave Alan more clothes and food to fight the cold. Then they set up a system of ropes and pulleys to pull him out carefully. The rescue was slow and painful. Alan felt the cold rock scraping his chest and shoulders as he was pulled out. The rescuers worked carefully to avoid hurting him more. After about an hour, Alan finally came out of the slot. He was bruised but alive. The cold air outside felt much better than the freezing cave. Even though he was exhausted and cold, Alan was determined to walk back to the car by himself. Roaring River Cave Incident. On October 14, 2022, a team of expert cave divers went to explore Roaring River Cave in Missouri. The cave was known for its deep underwater tunnels, and the team had a careful plan. Eric Hahn, a 27-year-old cave diver, had an important job. He had to place extra air tanks deep inside the cave. These tanks would be used as safety backups for the other divers. Eric was working with another diver. They should place the extra tanks at 130 feet and 190 feet underwater, and 2 other divers were going to explore the deeper parts of the cave. Before entering the water, the team checked all their equipment. They made sure their tanks were full and their lights were working. Eric was using a special breathing device called a rebreather. This machine recycles the diver's air. It removes carbon dioxide and adds oxygen. This helps divers stay underwater longer, but it can be dangerous if it's not used correctly. At around 11 in the morning, Eric entered the water. He followed a guide rope that would help him find the way back out. As he swam deeper, the water got colder and darker. His lights helped him see. Eric reached the 190-foot mark and saw one of the deep divers there. That diver said Eric seemed fine. He was placing one of the extra air tanks just like they had planned. But then something went wrong. Suddenly, Eric crashed into the other diver. Then he started swimming straight up very fast. This is extremely dangerous when you are deep underwater. The other diver, known as Diver 3, saw that Eric was in trouble. He swam after him and caught up when Eric hit his head on the rocky ceiling of the cave. Eric was struggling with his rebreather. Diver 3 tried to help by giving him a backup breathing hose, but Eric pulled his main mouthpiece out without closing it. That allowed water to rush into the system. Diver 3 quickly gave Eric the backup hose and cleared the water. But then, Eric started to shake. He was having a seizure. This type of seizure is called oxygen toxicity. It happens when a diver breathes too much oxygen at deep depths. It makes the diver lose control and stop breathing normally. Diver 3 held onto Eric and tried to keep the air hose in his mouth, but it was hard. Eric kept shaking, and they were very deep underwater. Then both of them sank to the bottom of the cave, 204 feet down. They kicked up dirt from the cave floor, and everything went dark. Diver 3 couldn't see the rope that showed the way out. He was tired, low on air, and completely disoriented. He knew if he stayed, he might also die. Meanwhile, another diver had already gone up to get help. Diver 3 made the hardest choice of his life. He let go of Eric and started to swim back up. As he rose, he met another diver, known as Diver 2. That diver tried to go down to find Eric, but he couldn't see clearly either. His oxygen levels were also becoming dangerous. He had to turn back too. By the time Diver 3 reached the surface, Eric had been missing for over 20 minutes. The team realized that Eric was no longer alive, and the rescue had turned into a recovery. The dive leader made the decision to stop all rescue attempts and ordered everyone to return safely. Later that day, around 4 p.m., a special recovery team from the Missouri Highway Patrol arrived. They found Eric's body about 200 feet deep in the cave. Sac Actun Cave Tragedy. Amy Maria Arriaga, a 39-year-old woman, wanted to experience something new. She had always loved nature, and this time, she chose something bold: cave diving. So, she called her friend Alessandro. He had a lot of experience with diving. Amy asked him to teach her and join her on a diving trip to the Sac Actun Caves in Mexico. After a few days of training, they were ready. Their plan was simple. Amy would lead the dive, swimming in front. Alessandro would follow behind her with a camera to record the adventure. They agreed not to go deeper than 40 feet. They would follow a line in the water to keep safe. At 11:26 in the morning, Amy and Alessandro jumped into the water. Amy led the way, and Alessandro followed behind with his camera. For 25 minutes, everything was going well. They swam and explored the underwater caves. Alessandro saw light coming from another cave entrance. This helped them know they were going the right way. A few minutes later, they passed a cave called No Name. Most divers avoid this area because it's dangerous. Amy and Alessandro swam past it without stopping. Then Alessandro saw something beautiful. Natural light was shining down into the water. He wanted to take a picture of Amy in this pretty light. To take a good picture, he needed to turn off his bright diving lights. While Alessandro turned off his lights, Amy kept swimming ahead. Amy came to a place where the path split into two caves. One cave was on the left, and one was on the right. Amy thought she should go left, so she did. She didn't look back at Alessandro because she didn't want him to think she was confused. She hoped she made the right choice. As soon as Amy entered the new cave, she knew something was wrong. It was very dark, so dark that even with her lights, she could only see a little bit ahead. Amy looked around for Alessandro, but he was not there. She flashed her lights on and off to try to signal him, but she couldn't see anyone. She tried again, but still no sign of him. At first, Amy wasn't too worried. Alessandro had been right behind her just moments ago. She was sure he would find her soon. Meanwhile, Alessandro turned off his lights and looked up to take Amy's picture, but she was gone. Just a moment ago, she was a few feet away, and now she had disappeared. He thought she must be up ahead waiting for him. He swam around to get a better view, but still couldn't see Amy or her lights. He waited for about 3 minutes, then removed the markers and line that showed where they had been. He was so sure she was ahead of him. This was a big mistake. Alessandro swam all the way to their meeting point, but Amy wasn't there. Now he was really worried. In the dark cave, Amy was scared. She had been waiting a long time and still no sign of Alessandro. She kept signaling with her lights as much as she could. Soon, Amy started to feel weak. Breathing became harder. She remembered that underwater, she needed her air tank to breathe. If she stayed too long, her air would run out. She tried not to panic. Alessandro had to find her. He was her only way out. Alessandro went back to the surface to look for Amy. His air had run out, so he needed to get another tank before going back to search for her. A few hours later, around 2:13 in the afternoon, Alessandro went back into the water alone. This time, he connected ropes and put markers along the way, hoping Amy might find them. A few minutes into his search near the No Name Cave, Alessandro found Amy. Her body was floating in the water, her air tanks were empty, and she was not breathing. Shroeder's Pant Cave Incident. On February 13, 1965, 3 friends went caving near the small town of Dolgeville, New York. Their goal was to explore a cave known as Shroeder's Pant Cave, a narrow and dangerous cave in the foothills of the Adirondacks. The group included 23-year-old James Mitchell, a chemist from Massachusetts, Charles Bennett, a Harvard graduate student, and Hetty Miller, a nurse. Before entering the cave, they stopped by the home of George Lyon, one of the men who had discovered the cave in 1947. George wasn't home, so no one warned them about the recent snowmelt. Freezing water was now flowing through the cave. Despite the danger, the 3 friends entered. They squeezed through tight spots like Lemon Squeeze, Z-Bend, and Gun Barrel. After crawling for some time, they reached a vertical shaft about 80 feet deep. James wanted to go deeper. He put on his harness and clipped into the safety rope. He slowly lowered himself into the shaft, but about halfway down, something went wrong. A freezing waterfall, nearly 20 degrees Fahrenheit, was pouring straight onto James's head. Rescue reports estimated that about 10 gallons, 38 liters, of freezing water were landing on his head every minute. Then, his rope got stuck and trapped his arm. He was unable to make progress in either direction. James was now hanging in the shaft with freezing water crashing down on him. Even though he was trapped, James stayed calm. He told his friends he would be okay. Charles and Hetty were only 10 feet above him. For 45 minutes, they tried pulling him up, but but they couldn't fight against the water. Charles knew they needed help. He exited the cave to find rescuers. The National Capital Grotto Rescue Squad, a newly formed cave rescue team, flew in from Washington, D.C. on Air Force 2. When the rescuers reached James, he was no longer moving. The cold had taken his life. For the next 3 days, rescuers tried to widen the passage to recover the body. But then part of the shaft collapsed. Rocks and debris started falling, and it became too dangerous to continue. With James's body still hanging inside, the decision was made to seal the cave. Explosives were used to close the entrance. Large rocks were placed over it, and a memorial stone was set up outside. In 2006, Christian Lyon, the grandson of George Lyon, decided to go back. He believed James deserved a proper burial. Christian and a team of expert cave explorer reopened the cave. He descended the same shaft and found James's bones at 75 feet. After 41 years, James Mitchell was finally brought back to the surface and laid to rest. Tham Talu Cave tragedy. On October 13, 2007, 9 people went to explore Tham Talu Cave in Khao Sok National Park, Thailand. The group included 6 tourists and 2 Thai guides. One of the tourists was Helena, a 17-year-old girl from the UK. Her boyfriend John came with her. There was also a 10-year-old boy from Germany and 2 teenage girls from Switzerland with their parents. The group entered the cave shortly after noon. The weather looked fine, and there was no rain at the entrance. But it had rained earlier in the mountains, far upstream. Tham Talu Cave is part of a large water system, and rain from far away can cause flash floods inside the cave. Inside, they walked through a shallow stream. The water started rising, but the group kept going. The guides didn't think the situation was dangerous yet. Then, a sudden flash flood hit the cave. Water rushed in fast. It filled up the tunnel within minutes. The guides shouted for everyone to climb to higher ground. Some people managed to get up onto a slope, but others were caught in the current. There was no space to escape. The tunnel filled with water, and there was no air left in some parts of the cave. 8 of the 9 people inside drowned. Only Helena survived. She climbed onto a small ledge above the water, stayed there alone for over 16 hours. She was finally rescued by search teams the next day. The bodies of the other tourists, both Thai guides, were found dead, including the 10-year-old boy from Germany. After the tragedy, the Park Service closed Tham Talu Cave. They created a seasonal rule. From June to November, the cave would be off-limits because of flooding risk. Warning signs were added, and tour operators were told not to lead trips during the rainy season. For more than a decade, the rule was followed. But later, some guides started leading tours again during rainy months, especially if the weather looked fine near the entrance. Then, on August 6, 2024, it happened again. A group of 22 tourists and 2 Thai guides entered the cave. It had rained the night before, but the skies were clear that day. The group started their tour in the afternoon. At around 5 p.m., they were near the exit when a flash flood hit. Water from the mountains rushed into the cave and trapped the group inside. Thai rescue teams were sent quickly. They saved all the tourists and one of the guides, but the second guide, a 37-year-old man, was swept away by the current while helping others. His body was found hours later. Megawell Cave Incident. On January 13, 1991, 3 cave explorers went to explore Megawell Cave in Jackson County, Alabama. John Mosley, a 36-year-old cave explorer with 10 years of experience, Linda O'Donnell, a newcomer, and Charles Daffinger, age 26. He was eager to prove himself on a big drop. Their goal was the cave's famous 310-foot pit. Heavy rain had fallen 3 times that week, so a stream now poured into the entrance. John brought a 600-foot rope he had bought secondhand from Polish cavers in Mexico. They set it up at the entrance. The rope had to go over a sharp rock ledge 20 feet down. That ledge already had deep grooves from earlier ropes rubbing against it. John descended first, checking the rigging as he went. Linda followed slowly. Finally, Charles clipped in and slid over the edge. By 2 p.m., all 3 stood in the huge chamber at the bottom. Water roared off the walls. After about 45 minutes, Linda was shivering. John said it was time to go. He climbed first and reached the surface safely. Linda climbed next, tired and cold. When she crawled out, John sent her to the car to warm up. Charles started up last. John waited at the top. 20 minutes passed, no movement. John called down, nothing. He pulled the rope. It felt light. John pulled the rope up and saw it was broken. The rope had snapped. Somewhere in the 310-foot shaft, Charles had fallen. Panic hit. John ran to the car and told Linda. They flagged a passing driver and asked him to call for help. Back at the cave, John rigged a fresh line and dropped into the darkness. At the bottom, he found Charles. The helmet was shattered. The fall had been fatal. John wrapped the body in the sleeping bag and climbed out to meet rescuers. Firefighters and rescuers worked through the night. At 7 a.m. the next day, they raised Charles' lifeless body to the surface. Sotano Cave tragedy. On July 10, 2005, 5 friends went camping in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. Their plan wasn't to explore or to go caving properly. They wanted to throw a party underground. Miguel was the leader of the group. The others were Carlos, Alejandro, Ali, and Daniel. None of them had ever been in a cave before. They brought no helmets, no ropes, and no proper flashlights. What they did bring was beer, tequila, and a speaker. That afternoon, the group entered Sotano Cave. Right away, they started drinking. As the sun went down, the party kept going. Music echoed through the cave, and the 5 friends kept drinking late into the night. They went deeper into the cave than they should have. Along the way, they ignored warning signs that clearly said, "Do not enter." Around midnight, a heavy rainstorm began outside. Water started flowing into the cave. Miguel wanted to go back to their campsite to get more beer. His friends were worried. He had been drinking all night and was unsteady. Alejandro agreed to go with him to make sure he didn't get lost. Miguel walked ahead while Alejandro followed. The rain was pouring and the ground was slick with mud. Visibility was poor. In the darkness, Miguel lost track of the trail. He thought he saw solid ground ahead and stepped forward, but there was nothing there, just a deep vertical pit. Miguel fell. He screamed as he fell down the deep pit. He fell 79 feet, hit a slope, slid down, and fell another 62 feet. His body slammed into the rocks. Alejandro called out, but there was no answer. He panicked and ran back to tell the others. Carlos called the police. Ali and Daniel tried to find Miguel themselves. Rescue teams arrived at dawn. The rain had stopped. The group led rescuers to the spot where Miguel had fallen. Using ropes and helmets, the professionals descended safely. At the bottom, they found Miguel's body. He had died instantly from head trauma. They brought his body back to the surface. After the accident, authorities placed new warning signs. Underground parties were officially banned. Pierre Saint Martin Cave Tragedy. In August 1952, a group of international cave explorers began an expedition into the Pierre Saint Martin cave system in the Pyrenees, along the border of France and Spain. At the time, it was believed to be the deepest known cave in the world. One of the explorers was Marcel Lubens, a 33-year-old French engineer. He was an experienced caver and served as second in command of the expedition, which was led by Belgian professor Georges Cohn. The team spent 6 days deep underground. They explored narrow tunnels, set up rope ladders through the caves, and mapping vertical shafts. On August 27th, the team began their ascent back to the surface. Marcel was being lifted up one of the vertical shafts using a steel cable and winch. Then, disaster struck. Just as Marcel was being hauled up, the cable snapped. He fell 130 feet straight down onto a rocky slope. Marcel survived the fall but was badly injured. His back was broken, and he lost consciousness. He was now trapped 1,260 feet below the surface, deep inside the mountain. The team began a difficult rescue mission. Cavers climbed back down to reach Marcel. A doctor followed and treated him underground, using only headlamps and candlelight. In an incredible effort, they even performed a blood transfusion inside the cave. Over the next 2 days, rescuers tried to bring Marcel back up using a manual winch, but the shaft was narrow, and falling rocks made it extremely dangerous. Debris threatened both Marcel and the rescuers. After nearly 36 hours on the evening of August 29th, Marcel Lubens died in the cave.